In the heart of North London, tucked behind layers of brick and barbed wire, stands a prison older than most of the men it holds. HMP Pentonville, built in 1842, and somehow still operating like it's 1842. At first glance, its walls look solid, unbreakable, eternal. But step closer, and you'll hear the cracks. Not in the stone, but in the system. A Victorian dream turned modern disaster. Pentonville was supposed to be the crown jewel of British justice, a model prison built to reform rather than punish. Each man was to sit alone, in silence, and reflect on his crimes. The design itself was meant to rehabilitate. A bold idea for 1842. But what happens when that same blueprint is forced to carry the weight of the 21st century? By 2025, the answer was clear: chaos. Over 1,200 men crammed inside a space built for barely half that. Cells meant for one now hold two, sometimes three. Toothbrushes share sinks with mice. The air is thick with sweat, smoke, and the sharp scent of disinfectant that never quite hides the decay. It's not just overcrowding. It's pressure. Constant, crushing pressure. And when you press down on a system for too long, eventually, it breaks. Inside the pressure cooker every morning, steel doors slam shut, echoing through the narrow wings. The sound is unmistakable, metal against metal, the sound of control. But inside those cells, control is the last thing anyone feels. Prisoners wake up to the same gray walls and broken toilets. Some haven't been outside for days. Many have no work, no classes, and nothing to do but stare at the walls, at each other, at the clock that never seems to move. The officers walk the landings, overworked, undertrained, and terrified. In a place designed to separate the guilty from the innocent, everyone feels trapped in the same collapsing world. For years, inspection reports told the same story: unsafe, overcrowded, failing. And yet, the doors stayed open. The men stayed locked in. And the warnings kept piling up. The warning signs. In 2022, the inspection team that walked through Pentonville found what they called fundamental weaknesses. Behind the bureaucratic language lay something darker. Prisoners saying they didn't feel safe, guards asleep on duty, and wings where no one knew exactly how many men were actually locked inside. By 2025, it was worse. 1 in every 2 prisoners told inspectors they were afraid. Afraid of attacks. Afraid of officers. Afraid of what might happen if they asked for help. Some men came in with mental health issues. Others developed them inside. Either way, there wasn't enough staff to monitor them. Some were placed on suicide watch and left alone for hours. Others didn't make it that far. The inspector's words were chilling. Pentonville is unsafe, filthy, and dangerously understaffed. But for the men inside, those words came too late. The smell of decay. Ask anyone who's worked there, and they'll tell you, Pentonville has a smell. It's not just the damp stone or the stale air. It's something heavier. A mixture of old sweat, cheap tobacco, and hopelessness. The walls are stained. The ceilings leak. And the noise never stops. Shouting, clanging, screaming. Every sound blending into one endless roar. There's no silence in Pentonville, only tension. Drugs flood the wings through drones, visitors, even corrupted staff. The scent of burning spice drifts down corridors. A few puffs and men fall, convulsing on the floor while others bang on the doors, begging for help that takes too long to come. When the staff finally arrive, they're not surprised. This happens every week. Sometimes every day. It's not that no one cares. It's that the system stopped caring long ago. First night, last hope. For new arrivals, the first night inside any prison is supposed to be the most monitored, the most controlled. It's when suicides are most likely. But at Pentonville, there's no control left. Men arrive scared, confused, still shaking from the police van ride. They're thrown into reception cells without bedding or even cutlery. No medical screening. No mental health checks. Just noise, filth, and waiting. One inspector called it reception hell. And that's exactly what it was. Some men never make it to the wings. Some are kept there overnight, others for days, while staff scramble to find space. If you die in that cell, no one notices until morning roll call. It's not neglect by individuals. It's neglect by design. Every process that should protect the vulnerable has been eroded by years of overcrowding and political indifference. The illusion of control. Pentonville's biggest lie is its structure. From above, the star-shaped design looks efficient. 5 long wings spreading from a central hub, built so one guard could, in theory, see every corridor from a single point. That was the 19th century dream. But now, it's an illusion. Today, the center is a ghost station. One officer, maybe two, watching monitors that barely work, trying to keep track of over 1,000 men. On the wings, fights break out faster than they can respond. By the time backup arrives, it's too late. The blood's already on the floor, locked up and forgotten. The most haunting part of Pentonville's story isn't the violence, it's the silence. Men locked in cells for 23 hours a day, sometimes longer. Days without showers, weeks without visits, months without a reason to hope. And then, one morning, they re-gone, released back into London's streets with nothing but a bus ticket and a warning letter. Former inmates describe Pentonville as the place that kills your spirit. One said, "It's not a prison. It's a warehouse for broken people." But even warehouses have inventory. At Pentonville, the system lost track. Men overstayed their sentences because paperwork was misplaced. Others were freed early by mistake. The machine was breaking down, and no one knew how to stop it. Whispers of collapse. By mid-2025, the truth could no longer be hidden. The Chief Inspector of Prisons issued an urgent notification, a public declaration that HMP Pentonville had, in effect, lost control. The words were scathing. Conditions are squalid. Supervision of vulnerable prisoners is inadequate. The jail is unsafe, violent, and chaotic. It was no longer a warning, it was a siren. The government scrambled to respond. Ministers promised investigations, new funding, and reform. But for the people on the inside, nothing changed. The same doors slammed shut that night. The same shouts echoed down the corridors. And life, or something like it, went on. The bigger picture. Pentonville is just one name in a list of failing prisons across England and Wales, but it's the one that refuses to stay out of the headlines. Because it represents something deeper, the collapse of the British prison system itself. Old buildings, low pay, dangerous overcrowding, and an unspoken understanding that, for many inside, rehabilitation is just a word on paper. Every year, new governments promise reform. Every year, the same reports come out. And every year, the crisis deepens. The public rarely notices until something spectacular happens, an escape, a murder, a scandal. Then, the spotlight turns back to those decaying Victorian walls, and the cycle begins again. As 2025 drew to a close, Pentonville's story had reached its breaking point. Officers were leaving faster than they could be replaced. Prisoners were rioting, and inspectors were describing it not as a correctional facility, but as a humanitarian crisis. It's the kind of place where chaos feels ordered, but Pentonville's descent wasn't sudden. It was slow, invisible, a rot that began decades ago and spread through the system until even the foundations began to crumble. And that's where the story truly begins. Because what happened next, the escapes, the deaths, and the political fallout, would expose just how deep the cracks really ran. When chaos festers long enough behind walls, it doesn't stay hidden forever. At HMP Pentonville, the collapse that had been building for decades finally came crashing into public view. And it started, as these stories often do, with an escape. The Great Escape, Pentonville, November 2016. A gray, cold morning in North London. Guards make their rounds, counting prisoners like every other day. Except this time, two of them are gone. James Whitlock and Matthew Baker, both dangerous, both desperate, had vanished from their cells overnight. Their escape wasn't a sophisticated inside job. It was raw, old-school ingenuity. Sheets braided into ropes, metal bars cut with makeshift tools, mannequins made from clothes and pillows, left under blankets to fool the guards. By the time the morning headcount exposed the truth, Whitlock and Baker were already miles away, free men. It sounded like a movie, but for the British government, it was a nightmare. Within hours, Pentonville was locked down. Helicopters thundered over London. Reporters camped outside the prison gates. How could two men escape a supposedly secure prison with bedsheets and toothbrushes? Behind closed doors, the answer was simple. Neglect. The locks were rusted. The alarms didn't work. And the guards who should have been watching the wings were stretched so thin, they barely noticed the sound of metal grinding through the night. An internal investigation later revealed the truth. Pentonville had no functioning CCTV covering key parts of the wing. Some officers hadn't even received full training. And one of the escapees, Whitlock, would remain on the run for more than a year. The public outrage was deafening. Pentonville wasn't just another broken prison anymore. It was a national scandal. Violence inside the walls after the escape, the government promised reform. But promises don't fix rot. Over the next few years, the prison descended further into violence. Inmates attacked officers with boiling water and improvised weapons. Drug debts turned wings into war zones. Weapons were everywhere. Staff were outnumbered and unprotected. And the systems that should have prevented the killing had completely failed. Jamal's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a warning, one that went unheeded. Life and death in the shadows after Jamal's murder, Pentonville entered what inspectors later called its darkest period. Deaths became routine: suicide, overdose, neglect. Men found hanging in their cells hours after officers had passed by. In one case, a prisoner lay dead for hours before anyone noticed. Self-harm rates skyrocketed. One report noted that more than half of all prisoners said they had felt unsafe at some point during their stay. Many were mentally ill. Others were addicts, locked in tiny cells with nothing to do but spiral. A prison psychologist described it bluntly: "We're not rehabilitating men anymore. We're warehousing despair." For some, that despair turned outward in riots, fires, and assaults. For others, it turned inward and quietly consumed them. The forgotten prisoners, the chaos didn't just claim lives, it also stole time. By 2024, reports emerged that several inmates at Pentonville had been kept past their release dates. Administrative errors, misplaced paperwork, the kind of small mistakes that mean everything when your life depends on a date. One man served 6 extra months after his sentence had expired. Another spent 3 weeks unlawfully detained because no one processed his paperwork. And yet, in the same year, another inmate was released by mistake, a mix-up in court orders. It was the ultimate irony. In a prison where some men couldn't get out even when they should, others were walking free without anyone noticing. To the public, these were errors. But inside Pentonville, they were symptoms, proof that control was an illusion. The urgent notification then, in 2025, the collapse went public. Charlie Taylor, Chief Inspector of Prisons, issued an urgent notification, one of the most severe rebukes a British prison can face. His statement was damning. Pentonville is unsafe, unclean, and failing at every level. Prisoners are unlawfully detained, officers are undertrained, and the environment is unfit for human habitation. The report described scenes straight out of a dystopian film: rats running across food trays, prisoners locked in for 23 hours a day, staff so burned out they no longer intervened in fights. In short, Pentonville had ceased to function as a prison and had become a crisis. The Justice Secretary promised an inquiry. Funding was announced, but few believed it would change anything. Because Pentonville's problems weren't new, they were generational. And by now, even the people who worked there had stopped pretending it could be fixed. Voices from the inside. Former officers said, "We were short-staffed every day. You'd be on a wing with 150 prisoners and 2 officers. If something kicked off, you just prayed backup came before someone got killed." Former inmate. "It's like a war zone. Every day someone gets beaten, someone gets stabbed, someone's on spice. You don't sleep. You just wait for morning." Prison nurse. "You stop asking how this happened. You just do what you can. The system's broken, and we all know it." Their testimonies paint a chilling picture, one of exhaustion, fear, and survival. This wasn't a place of rehabilitation. It was a place where hope went to die. When the story hit the headlines, again, the response from Westminster was predictable: shock, condemnation, promises. Politicians lined up to call the situation unacceptable. The Justice Secretary vowed to restore order and decency. But on the ground, little changed. The prison's age, its crumbling walls and outdated systems, made reform nearly impossible. And with overcrowding across the country's entire prison network, there was nowhere else to send the men inside. So the doors stayed locked. The staff stayed scared. And the noise never stopped. The breaking point. By late 2025, Pentonville's name had become shorthand for everything wrong with Britain's prison system. When inspectors visited again, they found what they called squalid and chaotic conditions. Prisoners were living among filth, infestations, and violence so common it barely registered. And in one haunting moment, the illusion of control finally shattered. An officer on the night shift found a man hanging in his cell, the second suicide that month. The note left behind was short. Tell them I tried to get help. That note became the symbol of Pentonville's failure, because he had asked for help, and the system never answered. The symbol of a broken system. Pentonville's chaos is not isolated. Across Britain, prisons are buckling under the same weight: overcrowding, staff shortages, mental health crises, drug epidemics. But Pentonville is different because it's visible, because every failure there happens in the shadow of London, just minutes from Parliament. And yet, somehow, it remains forgotten. Its towers still stand, its gates still open every morning, and the cycle still repeats. The public sees a prison that keeps dangerous men off the streets. What they don't see is how close that prison is to falling apart completely. By the end of 2025, Pentonville wasn't just a failing institution. It was a symbol, a mirror reflecting everything broken in Britain's justice system. In the next chapter, we look at what happens when the government finally steps in, the investigations, the promises of reform, and the haunting question that lingers: can a system built on punishment ever truly deliver justice? When a system collapses in silence, the world moves on. But when it falls in plain sight, right in the heart of London, the world demands answers. And that's exactly what happened after the chaos at HMP Pentonville became impossible to ignore. The storm breaks. By early 2025, public outrage had reached boiling point. The escape, the murders, the suicides, the unlawful detentions, each story had chipped away at the illusion that Britain's prisons were under control. And now, the truth was undeniable. The government had to act. News cameras filled Westminster as the Justice Secretary stood before reporters. His words were polished, his tone firm, but the cracks showed. We will not tolerate the failings at Pentonville. A full investigation has been ordered. Immediate measures are being taken to restore safety and order. But inside the prison, officers who'd worked there for decades just shook their heads. They'd heard it all before. The inquiry begins. Within weeks, an independent inquiry was launched, led by former prison governor Andrea Albert and a team of inspectors. Their mission: uncover what really went wrong. What they found was decades of neglect. Staff shortages so severe that entire wings were left unsupervised. Cells designed for one man holding two, sometimes three. A crumbling infrastructure dating back to the Victorian era. And perhaps the most chilling discovery: the failures weren't just local. They were national. Pentonville was simply the loudest symptom of a system stretched past breaking point. The report's conclusion was blunt: Pentonville is not fit for purpose. Without urgent reform, further loss of life is inevitable. It wasn't just an assessment, it was a warning. Inside the push for reform, after the report, the Ministry of Justice announced a £10 billion investment plan. New facilities, recruitment drives, upgraded security systems. But the people inside Pentonville weren't celebrating. A former guard told reporters, "You can pour money into the walls, but if you don't fix what's inside, the culture, the burnout, the hopelessness, you're just painting over rust." He was right, because the heart of Pentonville's collapse wasn't infrastructure, it was people. Overworked officers, undertreated inmates, a system that demanded order but offered no support. The reforms promised new CCTV systems, mental health units, and drug recovery programs. But on the ground, the change was slow. And in a place where survival is a daily struggle, slow is another word for too late. The human cost. The inquiry's numbers told one story, but the faces told another. The family of Jamal Mahmood still waits for justice. The officers who left the job carry scars you can't see. And the inmates who survived Pentonville's darkest years speak of it like veterans of a forgotten war. One former prisoner, Leon, said it best: "You don't come out of Pentonville the same. You go in broken, and you come out numb." His words echo through every corridor still standing today. Through the chipped paint, the locked doors, the graffiti scratched into steel that says, "Still here." A system under pressure. While Pentonville struggles, the rest of Britain's prisons are nearing the same edge. Overcrowding has hit record highs. Officers are quitting faster than new ones can be trained. And rehabilitation, once the goal, has become a luxury few facilities can afford. In 2025, more than 80,000 people were behind bars in England and Wales, one of the highest rates in Western Europe. And with every new arrest, the system stretches thinner. Prisons are supposed to protect the public. But when they crumble from the inside, who's really being protected? A flicker of hope, Despite everything, there are still people fighting for change. At Pentonville, a handful of officers, reform advocates, and charities continue their work, trying to restore humanity to a system that has forgotten it. Organizations like the Prison Reform Trust and Howard League for Penal Reform are pushing for alternatives, education, rehabilitation, and proper oversight. A new governor has been appointed. He's promised transparency, staff welfare, and safety. He calls Pentonville a test case, the place that will prove whether Britain can truly rebuild its prison system. But even he admits, it won't happen overnight. You can fix a wall in a day, he says. Fixing a culture takes years. The symbolism of Pentonville. More than 180 years after it first opened, HMP Pentonville stands like a monument, not to justice, but to endurance. It has survived wars, riots, and reforms. And somehow, it's still standing. But look closer, and it's no longer just a prison. It's a mirror reflecting everything Britain doesn't want to see. A nation that talks about rehabilitation, but locks men in cages until they forget who they are. A system that claims to deliver justice, but runs on exhaustion, fear, and silence. And through it all, those same heavy doors keep closing, day after day. The unanswered question. Maybe Pentonville can be fixed. Maybe it can't. But one thing is certain. It has already changed how we see what's hidden behind those walls. It forced a question the system can no longer avoid. If a prison cannot protect, cannot rehabilitate, cannot even keep its own order, then what purpose does it serve? Because if the walls of Pentonville could speak, they wouldn't tell a story of crime and punishment, but of neglect, silence, and the human cost of forgetting that every number in a cell is still a person. This was Prison Chaos. How London's HMP Pentonville lost control. A story not about a single prison, but about what happens when a nation turns its back on the places it hides its mistakes. If we choose not to listen, then the next collapse won't just be behind bars. It'll be out here, with us. This is Crime Source. Subscribe for more.